Okay, so we're diving into some pretty intense material today.
Yeah, this one's a doozy.
Listen, Little Man by Wilhelm Reich.
Definitely not your typical light reading.
No, not at all. You've thrown us a real curveball with this deep dive request.
It's a fascinating book, though. You know, part social commentary, part philosophy.
And it's all delivered with this raw, almost confrontational
I-
energy.
Absolutely. It's like he's really grappling with some big questions about society, individual freedom, and
And he's talking directly to the reader as the little man.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like he's holding up a mirror to all of us,
We've got excerpts from the text itself, plus some images of the book and its pages.
including those striking black and white illustrations by William Steig.
Oh, yeah, those are really something. We'll have to get into those later.
Definitely.
But before we dive into the nitty-gritty, maybe you can give us a little background on the author.
Sure. So Wilhelm Reich was a pretty complex figure.
Yeah, I've been doing a little reading, and he definitely seems like a controversial character, to say the least.
He was born in 1897 and died in 1957. And he started out as a medical doctor and psychoanalyst.
A follower of Freud,
Right. But he eventually broke away from Freud and developed his own theories.
which some might say were a little out there.
To put it mildly, like his whole thing about orgone energy.
Yeah, what was that all about?
Well, he described orgone energy as this primordial cosmic energy that he believed permeated all living things.
And he even built those orgone accumulators.
Yeah.
Like those boxes people were supposed to sit in to absorb this energy.
He did. Now, these claims were never scientifically validated.
Right. It's generally considered pseudoscience.
But for Reich, this orgone energy was a central part of his understanding of human health and well-being.
Okay, so how does all of this tie into, listen, little man?
Well, the book was written in 1948 during a pretty turbulent period in Reich's life.
He was facing a lot of criticism for his unorthodox theories.
He was. And he was also becoming increasingly disillusioned with society, especially what he saw as the rise of authoritarianism.
So in this book, he's really wrestling with those big questions of individual freedom versus social control.
And the forces that he believed were suppressing our natural vitality.
Okay, I'm starting to get a sense of where he's coming from with all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So he uses this little man persona to represent, well, everyone, right?
He does. He's addressing the reader directly, like he's speaking to the average person struggling to find happiness in a world that feels increasingly restrictive.
And he's not exactly sugarcoating things, is he?
No, he's not. He's pretty blunt about calling out what he sees as the little man's tendency towards fear, conformity, and this constant striving for security.
Even at the expense of freedom and authentic expression.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, wake up. Are you really living or just existing?
Yeah, there's a real urgency to his message.
Yeah.
But I also sense a kind of compassion there, too, right? Like he understands the struggles of the average person.
There is. He recognizes that the little man is often trapped by forces beyond his control, like social pressures, economic hardship, political manipulation.
But he also seems to be saying that we have a responsibility to break free from those constraints and reclaim our own power.
Absolutely.
And a big part of that for Reich seems to be this idea of emotional liberation. He talks a lot about how repression, especially sexual repression, leads to all sorts of psychological and social problems.
Right. He saw this emotional plague, as he called it, as the root cause of so many issues. Anxiety, neurosis, violence, even fascism.
He really goes all in on that, doesn't he?
He does. He argues that suppressing our natural instincts and impulses creates this buildup of tension, frustration, and aggression.
Which ultimately poisons our individual lives and society as a whole.
Exactly.
So in a way, listen, little man, is almost like a call to arms, right? A challenge to wake up, shake off those shackles of conformity, and embrace our true selves.
It is he's saying, stop settling for mediocrity, stop living in fear. You have the power to break free and tap into your full potential.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I know that some of Reich's ideas, especially his views on sexuality, were pretty controversial in his time and remain so today.
Absolutely. And we definitely need to approach his work with a critical eye.
We're here to explore his ideas, not necessarily endorse them.
Right. But even if you don't agree with everything he says, there's no denying that he raises some really important questions about the nature of freedom, the impact of social structures, and the search for individual fulfillment.
I'm already starting to see why this book has resonated with so many people over the years, even though some of its ideas are considered outside the mainstream.
It's definitely thought-provoking.
Okay, so we've got a sense of who Wilhelm Reich was, the historical context of the book, and his overall message. Where do we go from here? What are some of the key arguments that we should unpack in Listen, Little Man?
Well, one of the most central themes is his critique of social institutions. He really goes after the family, religion, the state, even
Oh
science.
boy, he's not pulling any punches.
He argues that these institutions often function as mechanisms of control that end up suppressing individual freedom and creativity.
Hmm, that's a pretty bold statement.
Uh,
I'm curious to hear more about how he backs that up.
We'll definitely dig into that.
Hmm.
And we should also talk about his ideas on liberation.
Yeah, he talks a lot about that.
Hmm.
What does he mean by liberation, and how does he think we can actually achieve it?
Great questions. He doesn't just offer these vague platitudes about freedom, he outlines some very specific steps we can take both individually and collectively to break free from what he sees as the emotional and social prisons we've created for ourselves.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's get into it.
Mhm.
So we were talking about Reich's critique of social institutions, and wow, he does not hold back.
No, he doesn't.
Okay.
It's like he's looking at these structures that we often take for granted and saying, hey, wait a minute, these things might actually be hurting us more than they're helping us.
And one of the biggest targets of his critique is the traditional family structure.
Right. He argues that it can become a breeding ground for neurosis and repression.
Especially when it's based on like those old school patriarchal values, right?
Exactly, where the father is the unquestioned authority figure and everyone else has to fall in line.
Yeah, those families where children are expected to be seen and not heard.
Reich felt that this kind of environment stifled children's natural curiosity, their creativity, even their sexual energy.
And he saw that having long-term consequences not just for the individual, but for society as a whole.
Because those repressed emotions and desires don't just go away,
No, they fester. They come out in other ways, often in unhealthy ways.
like anxiety, depression, aggression, even violence.
And he saw this happening on a societal level too, right? With
Mhm.
the rise of fascism and authoritarianism.
Absolutely. He was living in Europe during that time, so he saw firsthand the dangers of these movements.
And he believed that they thrived on fear, conformity, and the suppression of individual expression.
All of the things that he felt were rooted in this emotional plague that he was talking about.
So it's like he's drawing a direct connection between personal repression and these larger societal problems.
It's a pretty radical idea when you think about it.
It is. It forces us to consider the possibility that the things we see wrong in the world might actually stem from our own internal struggle.
Right. It's not just out there, it's also in here.
That's a lot to take in.
It is. But it's also empowering in a way because it means that we have the potential to change things.
If we can recognize those patterns
Yeah.
within ourselves, maybe we can start to shift those patterns on a larger scale.
Exactly. And that's where Reich's idea of liberation comes in.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What did he mean by liberation? And how did he think we could achieve it?
Well, for Reich, liberation wasn't just some abstract concept. It was about really reclaiming our natural vitality, our capacity for joy, love, creative expression.
It's like tapping into that life force energy that he talked about.
Right. And he believed that this involved a multifaceted approach. It wasn't just about individual change. It was about societal change as well.
So it's not just about feeling good.
Yeah.
It's about creating a world where those feelings can actually flourish.
Exactly. He argued that true liberation required challenging oppressive social structures, promoting economic justice, creating a culture that values individuality and authenticity.
So it's almost like a revolution.
It is. But not just a political revolution. It's a revolution of consciousness.
A revolution in the way we think and feel and relate to ourselves and the world around us.
And this revolution for Reich started with self-awareness.
With really seeing ourselves clearly, right? Recognizing the ways that we've been conditioned, the masks we wear, the defenses we've built up to protect ourselves from pain.
Exactly. It's about taking off those masks and really confronting who we are underneath.
And then what? Once we've had that big aha moment, what do we do next?
Well, Reich believed that therapy could play a crucial role in this process. He developed this type of therapy called vegetotherapy.
Which focused on releasing those physical and emotional blockages that he felt were at the root of all those neurotic behaviors.
Right. He saw these blockages as impeding the free flow of orgone energy, which he believed was essential for health and well-being.
Of course, we're talking about Reich's ideas here, not necessarily endorsing the whole orgone energy theory.
Right. But even setting that aside, there's a lot of value in his emphasis on body awareness, emotional expression, and the importance of addressing those deep-seated patterns that hold us back.
It's about breaking free from those internal prisons that we create for ourselves.
Those limiting beliefs, those patterns of behavior that keep us playing small and living in fear.
And really stepping into our full potential.
Not just as individuals, but as members of a society that is capable of creating something better, something more just and compassionate.
And he actually gives some pretty specific examples of how to do this in the book, right? Like practical advice for how to break free from the little man mentality.
He does, and some of his suggestions are surprisingly relevant even today.
Really? Like what?
Well, for example, he talks a lot about the importance of critical thinking.
Oh, yeah. Questioning authority, not just blindly accepting what you're told.
Exactly. And resisting the urge to conform to social norms that don't align with your values.
I can definitely see how those ideas would resonate with people today, especially in our current social and political climate.
Absolutely. And he also emphasizes the importance of self-responsibility.
That's a big one.
It is. He's
Yeah.
constantly reminding the reader that you are ultimately in control of your own life,
That you have the power to choose how you respond to things.
and that you can't blame others for your own unhappiness.
That's a tough one to swallow sometimes, but it's also incredibly liberating when you really embrace it.
It is. It's about owning your choices, your behaviors, and the consequences that come with them.
But it's also about recognizing your agency, your ability to shape your own life, and to contribute to creating a better world.
And that's a message that's just as powerful today as it was back when Reich wrote this book.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about Reich's critique of social institutions, his ideas about emotional liberation, and his emphasis on self-responsibility. But what about those powerful excerpts you mentioned earlier, the ones that really capture the essence of his writing and his message?
Right. There are so many great quotes in this book, it's hard to choose just a few.
Well, let's hear some of them. I'm ready for a dose of Reich's unfiltered wisdom.
Okay, let me see.
Take your time.
Hmm.
We've got all the time in the world.
All right, so one that always sticks with me is, you are your own slave driver.
Whoa, that's powerful.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying we internalize all those societal pressures and end up becoming our own worst enemies.
It's like we create these limitations for ourselves based on fear or conformity or maybe just habit.
It's like we're living in a prison that we built ourselves.
Exactly. And we hold the key, but for some reason we're afraid to use it.
We're afraid of our own freedom.
I think that's part of it. Okay, here's another one. Love, work, and knowledge are the well springs of our life. They should also govern it.
I like that one. So he's saying that love, work, and knowledge are the things that give our lives meaning,
And that they should be the guiding principles for how we live.
not chasing after power or money or social status.
Right. Those things might bring temporary satisfaction, but they don't lead to true fulfillment.
It's about finding that balance between passion, purpose, and knowledge.
And connecting to something larger than ourselves.
Yeah, it's like finding your place in the world.
Okay, last one. That's the way it has always been. It is time for the living to become hard. More hardness is needed in the struggle for life in order to be able to safeguard happiness.
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's almost like a challenge.
It is. It's like he's saying that the path to liberation isn't going to be easy.
That we need to develop this inner strength, this resilience, in order to face the challenges that are inevitably going to come up.
And that happiness isn't just going to fall into our laps. We have to fight for it. We have to protect it.
It's interesting how he uses the word safeguard in relation to happiness.
Yeah, it's like he's saying that happiness is this precious thing that can easily be taken away from us.
If we're not careful, if we don't make a conscious effort to cultivate it and protect it.
I think that's where those William Steig illustrations really hit home.
Oh, yeah. Those images are so powerful. They really capture that sense of the little man struggling against these unseen forces.
Trapped in these absurd situations.
And there's a kind of dark humor to them, too.
Yeah, it's like Reich is pointing out the absurdity of it all.
The ways in which we get caught up in these systems and beliefs that ultimately don't serve us.
Exactly.
Plus, what do you think? What's our listener making of all of this? It's pretty intense stuff.
It is. But I think Reich would be happy that we're at least engaging with these ideas. You know, wrestling with them.
Challenging our assumptions.
And looking for ways to break free from those patterns that keep us trapped.
So what do you say, listener? Does any of this resonate with you?
Are there areas in your life where you feel like you're playing the role of the little man? Where you're holding yourself back out of fear or conformity? What would it look like for you to step into your full potential?
And how can you contribute to creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to do the same?
That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time.